When a narcissist goes through a breakup, what happens next is almost never what people expect. Most of us assume that walking away from someone toxic means they'll simply shrug it off and move on without a second thought. But the truth is far stranger and, in a strange way, far more satisfying. When you're trying to understand how a narcissist processes the end of a relationship, it helps to realize that you're not looking at a person who experiences emotional loss in the same way most people do. It's like slowly piecing together a puzzle that was never meant to be solved by outsiders. Their entire personality often functions on two separate layers. One is the confident, charming image they present to the world. The second layer is far more difficult to see because the narcissist spends enormous psychological energy keeping it hidden, not only from other people, but often from themselves. Beneath the polished confidence, charm, and apparent self-assurance often lies an unusually fragile sense of self-worth. Instead of feeling secure about who they are, they may depend heavily on external validation to feel valuable. Praise temporarily lifts them up, admiration reassures them, and being desired gives them a sense of importance. But because this confidence is built on outside approval rather than inner stability, it has to be constantly maintained. Imagine someone trying to keep a cracked mirror perfectly polished. From a distance, it reflects beautifully, but underneath, the glass is still fractured. Every compliment adds another layer of polish. Every success hides the cracks a little longer. But criticism, rejection, or even mild disappointment can feel like another crack spreading across the surface. This is why reactions that seem wildly disproportionate to the situation can occur. What looks like a small disagreement to you may feel, to them, like an attack on their entire identity. This hidden vulnerability explains why narcissists often struggle with genuine emotional intimacy. Real intimacy requires allowing another person to see your flaws, admit your mistakes, and accept that you are imperfect, yet still worthy of love. For someone whose self-image depends on appearing exceptional, that level of vulnerability can feel terrifying. Instead of risking exposure, they may choose to project confidence, superiority, or even indifference. As a result, they often create an idealized version of themselves that they desperately want others to believe. They want to be seen as the smartest person in the room, the most attractive partner, the most successful professional, or the victim who has always been misunderstood. Maintaining this carefully constructed identity becomes a full-time psychological task. Anything that supports it is welcomed. Anything that threatens it is often rejected, denied, or blamed on someone else. This is why accountability can feel so difficult for them. Admitting a mistake isn't simply acknowledging that they made a poor decision. It may feel like admitting they are fundamentally flawed. Rather than tolerate that painful feeling, they may rewrite events, shift responsibility, minimize what happened, or convince themselves that someone else caused the problem. Once you begin to recognize these two layers, the confident outer persona and the vulnerable inner world, many behaviors that once seemed contradictory begin to fit together. You understand why someone can appear incredibly self-confident while being devastated by minor criticism. You see why they crave admiration yet struggle with authentic closeness. You recognize why they may alternate between putting someone on a pedestal and suddenly tearing them down when the relationship no longer supports the image they want to preserve. This doesn't excuse hurtful behavior or remove personal responsibility. Every individual is accountable for how they treat others. But understanding the psychological structure behind these patterns helps explain why narcissistic relationships can feel so confusing. You're not dealing with one consistent emotional reality. You're interacting with two very different layers at the same time. The confident mask presented to the world and the fragile self hidden beneath it that is constantly trying to avoid shame, rejection, and emotional exposure. In the beginning, when a narcissist is pursuing you, they often arrive like a whirlwind. The attention feels overwhelming in the best possible way. They seem intensely interested in everything about you. They remember little details, shower you with compliments, make grand promises about the future, and create the impression that you have finally met someone who truly understands you. The relationship moves at an unusually fast pace because intensity itself becomes part of the emotional experience. This stage can feel incredibly exciting because it creates the illusion of extraordinary compatibility. You may feel seen, admired, and emotionally important in ways you never have before. Conversations last for hours. Affection seems effortless. They appear deeply invested in building a future together, often talking about lifelong plans before a healthy foundation has even had time to develop. But underneath that intensity is something quite different from secure emotional attachment. Rather than slowly building trust through mutual vulnerability, the narcissist is often building an emotional system that revolves around admiration, validation, and control. The attention they give you is frequently tied to how you make them feel about themselves. Your admiration becomes a source of emotional fuel that helps maintain the confident image they depend on. As time passes, reality naturally begins replacing fantasy. Every healthy relationship eventually reaches the point where imperfections become visible. Stress appears, disagreements happen, boundaries are established, individual needs become more complex. This is where emotionally healthy relationships deepen because both people learn to navigate differences together. For someone with pronounced narcissistic traits, however, this stage can become deeply uncomfortable. Instead of viewing conflict as a normal part of intimacy, they may experience it as criticism, rejection, or a threat to the idealized version of themselves they want to maintain. Even gentle feedback can feel disproportionately painful because it touches the fragile self-esteem hidden beneath their outward confidence. Rather than working through discomfort together, they may begin rewriting the story of the relationship. The qualities they once adored suddenly become flaws. Your independence becomes selfishness. Your boundaries become disrespect. Your emotional needs become evidence that you're too demanding. This shift often leaves partners confused because it seems to happen almost overnight. This change is not necessarily driven by a sudden discovery about who you are. Instead, it often reflects an internal struggle to preserve their self-image. If acknowledging problems would require accepting personal responsibility, it may feel psychologically safer to convince themselves that the relationship failed because of you. When the relationship finally ends, many people expect the narcissist to experience grief in the same gradual way others do. But their initial response can look surprisingly different. Some appear completely unaffected. Others immediately begin posting happy photos, entering new relationships, or acting as though nothing significant happened. To the person who was left behind, this can feel devastating. It may appear as though years of shared experiences meant absolutely nothing, but outward behavior doesn't always reveal internal reality. Some individuals with narcissistic traits cope by quickly replacing emotional discomfort with distraction, admiration from others, or a renewed focus on protecting their public image. That doesn't necessarily mean they have processed the relationship in a healthy way. Instead, difficult emotions may be pushed aside because facing vulnerability feels intolerable. Maintaining the appearance of confidence becomes more important than acknowledging genuine emotional pain. Over time, however, something interesting can happen. Once the immediate distractions lose their novelty, reminders of the former relationship may begin resurfacing unexpectedly. Certain places, songs, routines, anniversaries, or quiet moments can bring back memories they believed they had already escaped. These memories are often complicated because they don't simply involve missing another person. They may involve the loss of admiration, familiarity, stability, or the identity they held while the relationship existed. The absence of someone who consistently reflected back the image they wanted to see can create an uncomfortable psychological void. This is one reason some narcissistic individuals attempt to reconnect months or even years later. These attempts are not always motivated by genuine accountability or emotional growth. Sometimes they are driven by curiosity, loneliness, nostalgia, or a desire to restore a familiar source of validation. That doesn't mean every attempt at reconnection lacks sincerity. People are capable of change, especially if they actively seek professional help and demonstrate consistent accountability over time. But meaningful change is measured by sustained behavior, not by dramatic words, emotional promises, or temporary displays of affection. A genuinely healthier person accepts responsibility without minimizing your experience. They respect boundaries even when those boundaries disappoint them. They demonstrate empathy consistently rather than only when they fear losing someone. Most importantly, they show lasting behavioral change instead of relying on repeated cycles of idealization, conflict, separation, and reconciliation. Understanding these patterns is not about diagnosing every difficult former partner as a narcissist. Human relationships are complex, and many behaviors can have multiple explanations. Instead, Learning these dynamics helps explain why some breakups feel unusually confusing and emotionally destabilizing. When you stop asking, did they ever really care, and begin asking, what kind of emotional system were they operating from, the picture often becomes much clearer. That shift doesn't erase the pain of the relationship, but it helps replace confusion with understanding. Ultimately, the most important part of the story isn't how the narcissist processes the ending. It's how you process it. Healing begins when your attention moves away from trying to decode every one of their actions and returns to rebuilding your own sense of identity, confidence, and emotional security. That's the point where the relationship truly loses its power over your future. They shower you with attention, admiration, and grand declarations that make you feel like you finally found someone who truly sees you. This is the golden phase, the one where they build an entire fantasy around who you are and who they imagine the two of you becoming together. It feels intoxicating. It feels like fate. But that glow doesn't last because it was never built on anything real to begin with. Slowly, the mask starts to slip, and what's underneath is far less flattering. The charm gives way to control, the admiration gives way to manipulation, and the person you thought you knew starts to feel like a stranger wearing a familiar face. Living through the collapse of a relationship like this is a bit like standing in the middle of a storm that refuses to pass. There's chaos, there's confusion, and there's an emotional residue that lingers long after the actual breakup has happened. The scars aren't always visible, but they're there, quietly shaping how you see yourself and how you approach trust going forward. It's no exaggeration to say that mental health experts and researchers around the world have started treating narcissistic behavior almost like something contagious, something that spreads harm the way a virus spreads illness, because of how deeply it can damage the people caught in its path. If any part of this feels familiar to you, if you've lived through the confusion of loving someone who seemed incapable of loving you back the way you deserved, know that you're not alone in this. So many people are quietly walking the same road, trying to make sense of an experience that so rarely gets talked about honestly. There is something quietly reassuring about realizing you are not the only person who has walked through the confusing landscape of a narcissistic relationship. For many survivors, the most painful part wasn't just the manipulation or the heartbreak, it was the constant feeling that nothing made sense. You questioned your memory, doubted your instincts, and wondered whether you were overreacting to situations that left you emotionally exhausted. It can be an incredibly isolating experience because the relationship often appears completely different from the outside than it does behind closed doors. That is why learning about narcissistic relationship patterns can feel so validating. Suddenly, experiences that once seemed random begin to fit together. The intense idealization at the beginning, the subtle criticism that slowly chipped away at your confidence, the emotional highs and lows that left you constantly trying to earn back the warmth that once came so easily. The confusion after arguments where you somehow ended up apologizing, even when your feelings were legitimate. These patterns are described by countless people who have lived through remarkably similar experiences. There is comfort in recognizing that your confusion was not a sign of weakness or a lack of intelligence. Many emotionally capable, compassionate, and confident people become caught in these dynamics because the manipulation often unfolds gradually. Boundaries are crossed little by little, expectations shift over time, and what once seemed unacceptable slowly begins to feel normal. Looking back, the warning signs may appear obvious, but while you're living through them, they are often buried beneath moments of affection, hope, and the belief that things will return to how they were in the beginning. Perhaps the greatest source of comfort is discovering a community of people who can describe your experience before you even tell your story. They understand the emotional whiplash of being adored one day and devalued the next. They recognize the exhaustion of constantly trying to prove your worth to someone whose approval always seemed just out of reach. They know what it feels like to leave a conversation questioning your own reality, only to realize later that your instincts had been right all along. That shared understanding doesn't erase the pain, but it does replace isolation with perspective. It reminds you that your reactions were often responses to an unhealthy dynamic rather than evidence that something was wrong with you. Instead of asking, "Why wasn't I enough?" you begin asking, "Why did I believe I had to earn the basic respect and emotional safety every healthy relationship should provide?" As healing progresses, The focus gradually shifts away from trying to understand every decision the narcissist made and toward understanding yourself. You start rebuilding trust in your own judgment. You learn to recognize red flags earlier. You become more comfortable setting boundaries without guilt. Most importantly, you begin to understand that genuine love does not require you to sacrifice your peace of mind, your self-respect, or your sense of identity. In the end, the shared understanding among survivors is about more than comparing stories. It's about reminding one another that confusion can give way to clarity, self-doubt can be replaced with confidence, and the relationship that once seemed impossible to move beyond does not have to define the rest of your life. Every person who heals becomes living proof that even after the most disorienting emotional experiences, it is possible to rediscover stability, rebuild self-worth, and create relationships rooted in mutual respect rather than manipulation. Once the relationship actually ends, whether that ending came from you cutting contact or from being unceremoniously blocked on every app and phone number they have, the emotional aftermath can hit like a tidal wave. It's worth noting that narcissists are often the ones who initiate breakups themselves, and they tend to do it in a way that leaves their partner reeling, unfinished, and secretly hoping there's still a chance to fix things. If you were the one who made the decision to leave first, give yourself real credit for that. Ending a relationship with someone who consistently prioritized their own needs over yours takes a kind of strength that shouldn't be underestimated. To really understand what a narcissistic breakup looks like from their side, you have to go back to how the relationship started. In their mind, you weren't just a partner, you were something closer to a rescuer, someone who was going to swoop in and fix whatever was broken inside them. The problem is that no single person, no matter how devoted or patient, can single-handedly repair someone else's deep-seated wounds and self-destructive patterns. You were never meant to be their therapist, their savior, or their miracle worker. Real healing for someone like that requires actual professional help, consistent inner work, and probably more soul-searching than they're usually willing to do. It was never going to be solved just by being in a relationship with you. Here's the part that tends to surprise people the most. What actually destroys a narcissist after a breakup isn't your anger, your tears, or even your attempts to confront them about what they did. It's your indifference. Nothing rattles them more than realizing you genuinely don't care anymore. In many ways, narcissists behave like overgrown children who've never learned to regulate their emotions, and being discarded or realizing they've lost their grip on you strips away the very foundation their identity was built on. Your calm, your unwillingness to react, your refusal to hand over the attention and emotional energy they're desperately fishing for becomes the exact thing that unravels them from the inside out. Once you start to understand these underlying patterns, you gain a real sense of power over your own healing process. You stop reacting on instinct and start responding with intention, which puts you back in control of your own life and your own emotional recovery. That shift, from reacting to choosing, is often what separates people who stay stuck in the aftermath from people who eventually move forward and build something healthier for themselves. Moving on from someone like this really comes down to mastering your own emotional responses and your own actions, regardless of what they do or say. Narcissists tend to be remarkably skilled at pivoting their attention elsewhere the moment they sense they're losing your engagement. They'll often line up a new source of admiration almost immediately, sometimes even before the relationship with you has fully ended. Recognizing this pattern for what it is can be incredibly freeing because it stops you from taking their sudden coldness or their swift replacement of you as some kind of personal failure. It was never about you not being enough. It was always about their own inability to sit with themselves without an external source of validation propping them up. One of the cruelest ironies of dealing with a narcissist is how rarely you get any real closure. And that's not an accident. Real closure would mean they'd have to give up a piece of control, admit some kind of fault, or offer you the emotional resolution you deserve, and control is the one thing they're not willing to relinquish. So instead, they leave things messy, ambiguous, unresolved, dragging out the confusion long after the relationship has technically ended. This is exactly why so many people struggle to move forward after being with a narcissist. They keep waiting for an explanation, an apology, or some kind of clean ending that simply isn't coming. Here's where you actually get some of your power back. When you commit fully to going no contact, cutting off communication entirely, and refusing to engage with any of their attempts to pull you back in, something shifts. Narcissists genuinely struggle to handle a situation where they no longer have any visibility into your life or any influence over your reactions. A real transformation tends to happen once you become someone they simply can't track or manipulate anymore. Because here's the thing about narcissists: they run on emotional supply. They need attention, admiration, and reactions from the people around them the way most of us need food and water. So when you emotionally detach, when you stop giving them the reactions they're used to getting, it genuinely confuses them. And more importantly, it frees you. That detachment, uncomfortable as it might feel at first, is often the doorway to real liberation on your end, even while they're still trying to figure out what happened. Even after the relationship has ended, a narcissist will often be quietly hoping to see signs that you're struggling. They want proof that you're falling apart, that you miss them, that their absence is destroying you, because that's what feeds their ego and confirms their sense of importance in your life. This is exactly why taking a serious break from social media after a split like this matters so much. If they can see you posting, even indirectly, they'll analyze every detail looking for cracks. Some narcissists will go as far as creating fake accounts, sending friend requests from strange or unfamiliar profiles, all just to maintain some thread of connection to your life, even after you've made it clear you want distance. What really gets under their skin, more than almost anything else, is genuine indifference. When you stop caring what they think, what they're doing, or whether they even exist in your world anymore, it hits them somewhere deep. That kind of quiet, unbothered energy is like kryptonite to their ego, because it directly threatens the sense of control and importance they've built their entire identity around. It honestly doesn't matter who technically ended things first. In the early days after a split, a narcissist might feel like they still have the upper hand, especially if they were the one who walked away or did the discarding. But that sense of control tends to crumble fast once they realize they've been blocked, cut off, and locked out of your digital life entirely. And if they happen to catch even a glimpse of you thriving, looking genuinely happy, moving forward with your life online, it can be an absolute gut punch for them. Watching you flourish without them is one of the hardest things for a narcissist to sit with. The period after a breakup and everything that unfolds in its aftermath tends to expose exactly how deep the wounds of narcissistic behavior really run, both for you and, in their own twisted way, for them too. For your own healing, it's essential to really understand the manipulation tactics you experience so you can recognize them clearly and refuse to fall back into old patterns if they try to reach out again. Reclaiming your sense of self and your emotional well-being means drawing firm, non-negotiable boundaries and stepping back from digital spaces where they might try to reinsert themselves into your life. For people who share children with a narcissist, or who are stuck dealing with them in family settings where full no contact simply isn't realistic, the situation calls for a different kind of skill. A lot of people in these situations find real relief in a strategy known as gray rocking. The idea is simple in theory. You become as unremarkable and unreactive as possible, giving them absolutely nothing to work with emotionally. You stop rising to the bait, stop reacting to their provocations, and essentially become the most boring, uninteresting version of yourself whenever you're forced to interact with them. It sounds almost too simple to work, but it's remarkably effective, especially because so much of a narcissist's self-worth depends on being able to provoke a reaction out of the people around them. When you commit to gray rocking, you're directly cutting off the emotional supply that fuels their manipulative behavior. By staying detached and refusing to give them any real engagement, you become essentially invisible to them on an emotional level. Just background noise instead of a source of drama or validation. This kind of intentional distance quietly dismantles their usual tactics and, over time, tends to lead to them losing interest entirely. But here's an interesting twist worth knowing about. Once a narcissist redirects their attention towards someone new, someone who's currently giving them the admiration and validation they crave, the emotional distance that once baffled and frustrated them can actually make you less interesting to them, at least for a while. Ironically, that same detachment might later prompt them to try reaching back out, hoping to reignite the same emotional reactions they used to get from you. This push and pull, pulling you close and then pushing you away, showing sudden interest and then vanishing again, can repeat itself more than once. And it says a lot about just how unpredictable and self-serving narcissistic behavior patterns really are. Really understanding the mechanics of a narcissistic relationship isn't just useful information, it's an important part of personal growth and building genuine resilience going forward. For a lot of people, drawing on deeper spiritual or faith-based principles, things like humility, self-reflection, accountability, and the willingness to sacrifice ego for the sake of peace, can offer real guidance while navigating something this disorienting. Growing through an experience like this and learning to set healthy boundaries afterward usually requires support from more than one direction, both practical, everyday guidance, and something deeper and more spiritual. When you choose to present yourself as calm, unreactive, and simply uninterested in engaging with a narcissist's attempts to manipulate you, you're sending an incredibly powerful message without saying a single word. You're telling them without confrontation or argument that they've lost their grip on you, that their tactics no longer land the way they used to, and that message strikes right at one of their deepest fears: losing control. Narcissists tend to approach relationships the way someone might approach a chess match, constantly maneuvering for power and dominance. So when you respond to their attempts at manipulation with genuine calm instead of the reaction they're fishing for, it can throw them completely off balance. Sometimes that leads to them doubling down, becoming even more fixated on winning your attention back. Other times, it leads to a bruised ego and a quiet retreat, a blow to their self-image that a lot of narcissists never fully recover from. If you've lived through something like this, sharing what you've learned with others who are going through similar struggles can make a real difference. Even after experiencing the sting of being discarded and choosing to walk the difficult road of no contact, staying composed and steady is one of the most powerful tools you have for taking their influence away for good. Healing isn't always linear, and resilience isn't something that shows up overnight, but it's absolutely possible, and honestly, it's essential if you want to reclaim your peace and move forward into something healthier. So take this as your reminder to be patient with yourself during this process. Recovery from a relationship like this isn't quick, and it isn't always straightforward, but every step you take toward detachment, boundaries, and self-respect is a step toward reclaiming the life and the peace of mind that you deserve. Take care of yourself as you keep moving through this journey, because you're capable of coming out of this stronger, wiser, and far more at peace than you were before.